Welcome to Swetlana AI Podcast, episode 263. If you enjoyed these analyses, please do like and subscribe. It really helps us continue these deep dives.
Absolutely.
Today, we're pulling back the curtain on, well, one of the most powerful, yet often unseen forces in modern American policy. We are diving deep into the world of Stephen Miller, a figure who has been, absolutely instrumental in shaping right-wing nationalist discourse.
And implementing it, that's key.
Right, implementing it across the U.S. government.
And this is very much an analysis deep dive. We aren't just, listing his resume or policies.
Yeah.
We really need to examine Miller's psychological roots, his cultural background, the ideology, to understand not just what he pushes.
But the why, the deep-seated reason.
Exactly, the why. And understanding that is, well, it's vital.
Because
it really reveals how these highly ideological advisors, often unelected, can fundamentally reshape, well, everything. National identity, immigration law, even the sort of moral tone of government.
all from behind the scenes. Often.
Often, yes. And especially now. Since 2025, you have him in this incredibly powerful dual role, White House Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy and Homeland Security Advisor.
Wow, that's quite the nexus of power.
It truly is. Domestic policy, national security, all under his purview.
Okay, so let's start with what seems like the biggest contradiction, right?
Yeah.
The paradox of the policy architect.
Yeah.
Looking at his background, his worldview now feels, well, completely unexpected, doesn't it?
It really does.
And we talk about an intense conservative firebrand from hyper-liberal Santa Monica, California.
Right, and the paradoxes just keep stacking up. He's a Duke graduate, known for these polished, bespoke suits, but he's constantly railing against the perfidy of so-called elites.
Okay, but the biggest one, the one that really hits home, has to be his family history versus his policies.
Oh, absolutely. That's the most potent paradox. It really lies in his family's own story and the very system he now seems dedicated to dismantling.
So tell us about that history. It really personalizes this whole policy debate.
Okay, so Miller is of Eastern European Jewish descent. Our sources, they really detail how his maternal great-great-grandfather, Wolf Leib Glosser,
Okay.
he was fleeing these violent anti-Jewish pogroms in Antipol, that's in modern-day Belarus, back in 1903.
Fleeing violence.
Yes, and he arrived on Ellis Island with, get this, only $8 to his name. Didn't speak English. Only Polish, Russian, and Yiddish.
That's the absolute definition of the huddled masses, isn't it?
It is, precisely. And this family, including his grandfather, they thrived in Pennsylvania. And how did they thrive? Specifically through the process we now call chain migration.
The very thing he targets.
The exact thing. They built a successful department store chain. They are, literally the American dream success story, built on the exact kind of immigration system Miller now wants to eliminate.
It's just, wow. That kind of family history, you'd think, would almost mandate empathy for refugees, for immigrants.
You would think, and that's why the sources highlight the reaction from his own family so powerfully. It's quite stark.
What did they say?
Well, this tension, it actually became very public. We have direct quotes from his uncle, Dr. David S. Glosser.
His own uncle.
Yes, who wrote publicly about his, quote, increasing horror at his nephew's hostility toward refugees and immigrants.
That's strong language.
It is. And the uncle pointed out very directly that if Miller's current restrictive policies had been in effect back then, the Glosser family, quote, would have been murdered by the Nazis.
That is just a searing indictment. It really brings up a core psychological question, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
If his family history is such a clear example of the American dream built on openness, because he seemed to interpret it as, a mandate for absolute restriction, for purity.
That is the core tension, isn't it? The family identity is fundamentally rooted in escaping persecution, finding refuge.
Right.
But his chosen political identity seems rooted in restriction, in defining who belongs and who doesn't, in purity.
How does that work psychologically?
Well, often this kind of dissonance can manifest as a really strong need to impose absolute order. Maybe to ensure future security, viewing the path his own ancestors took as somehow an intolerable risk today.
So, like prioritizing ideological certainty over the messiness of the immigrant story?
Exactly. Prioritizing certainty, identity defense, over the ambiguity and, frankly, the empathy inherent in that journey his family undertook.
It's amazing how early this started for him, this sort of contrarian streak. If his roots are in liberal Santa Monica, where did this rigid conservative identity first take hold?
Well, the sources say it was sharp and early. He seems to have actively started cultivating this contrarian identity around 7th grade.
7th grade, wow.
Yeah, apparently sparked by reading things like Guns, Crime, and Freedom. He learned early, it seems, that conflict brought a certain kind of validation.
Validation through provocation, that makes sense, given his later actions.
Absolutely. In high school, back in Santa Monica around 1999, he waged this intense uphill campaign just to enforce the Pledge of Allegiance.
Really pushing buttons even then.
Oh, yeah. By 2002, he was making these really hyperbolic, provocative statements, like arguing that, quote, Osama bin Laden would feel very welcome at Santa Monica High School.
Okay, that's designed to inflame.
Completely. He apparently loved being the provocative conservative behind liberal lines. He used platforms like talk radio, The Larry Elder Show, as an early stage for these kinds of claims about liberal weakness or treachery.
And the sources point to the Duke lacrosse case in 2006 as a really key moment, something that cemented this approach for him.
Yeah.
Why was that case so formative?
The Duke lacrosse case, yes. That seems to have provided the spectacular public vindication for both his contrarian identity and his tactics.
Oh, so?
Miller just leaped to the defense of the accused players. His argument was that they were being presumed guilty simply because they were, quote, emblems of white privilege.
Okay.
And when the case eventually collapsed, completely fell apart.
Yep.
Well, Miller seems to have taken 2 huge lessons from that.
Which were?
First, it reinforced his, deeply held conviction that, quote, liberal dogma about racial oppression was wrong.
Okay, that's one.
And second, maybe even more importantly for his future career, he concluded that his scorched earth tactics were effective. That confrontation worked.
So the controversy didn't just validate his ideology in his mind.
Right.
It also validated using maximum conflict as a political tool. Aggression pays off.
Precisely. It fed right into that strong psychological need we talked about for ideological purity, for a clear black and white us versus them worldview.
And change is chaos.
For Miller, it seems political change, demographic change, cultural shifts, they all represent this chaotic risk. And his response, his drive, is to impose total order onto that perceived chaos.
It goes back to that early high school quote you mentioned.
Yes, that line, there can be no 50-50 Americanism. That quest for absolutism, for no gray areas, seems to be a core psychological driver for him.
And this ideological certainty, this comfort with conflict, it propelled him pretty quickly from Duke into politics, right?
Very quickly. He becomes this sort of archetype of the ideologue behind the throne.
Starting with?
He started with Michele Bachmann, actually, but then he quickly became the protege of Senator Jeff Sessions.
Sessions. That makes sense.
Yes, and under Sessions, his focus narrowed almost exclusively onto immigration restriction.
And his first major victory in that arena was a big one, wasn't it? Taking down the Gang of Eight bill.
Arguably his most strategic win. That total war he orchestrated against the bipartisan 2013-2014 Gang of Eight immigration bill, that was huge.
Because that bill seemed like it had real momentum. Path to citizenship for millions.
It was widely seen as almost unstoppable, bipartisan support, business support, but Miller proved otherwise.
How? How did he manage to defeat what looked like an inevitability back then?
It really was a masterclass in strategic maneuvering. He didn't just fight it politically in the Senate halls. He created an entire intellectual ecosystem around the opposition.
What do you mean by ecosystem?
He formed these really symbiotic alliances with key outside groups, and we should name them. Anti-immigration restrictionist think tanks like FAIR, the Federation for American Immigration Reform.
Okay.
CIS, the Center for Immigration Studies, and Numbers USA. These groups were crucial.
So they provided the academic arguments, the data.
Exactly. They provided the research, the data, the talking points, that veneer of intellectual backing. And Miller then seamlessly translated all of that into political strategy and policy positions for Sessions and other allies.
But it wasn't just think tanks, right? The media connection was key too.
Oh, absolutely critical. Simultaneously, he cultivated these extraordinarily close ties with conservative media outlets, especially Breitbart News.
And our sources suggest he wasn't just giving them quotes, he was more involved than that.
He was essentially acting as a de facto assignment editor for the restrictionist message. It's quite remarkable.
How so?
He was feeding editors links, including links to quite far-right websites like VDR and American Renaissance. He was handing them ready-made stories to run.
So basically laundering fringe ideas into the mainstream.
That's one way to put it. He was incredibly effective at legitimizing these quite hardline anti-immigration ideas, moving them from the fringes right into the center of the Republican conversation. That's how he weaponized messaging to kill the Gang of Eight bill.
That kind of strategic skill, that ability to shape the narrative.
Yeah.
It obviously served him well when he moved into the White House.
Immensely. It allowed him to consolidate a level of power that's pretty unusual for a presidential aide, especially during that first Trump administration.
Let's just quickly run through some of that policy impact because it was truly monumental.
Okay, moving from the rhetoric and the strategy to actual rigid implementation. His fingerprints are just everywhere.
Like the travel ban.
He was absolutely instrumental in crafting the version of the Muslim travel ban that eventually succeeded legally.
And the family separations policy.
He fiercely advocated for the policy of separating thousands of children from their families at the border, and notably, he defended it using this very cold, legalistic rigidity.
And beyond those headline-grabbing policies, there were quieter, more bureaucratic changes too, right? Things that flew under the radar.
Yes, and those had devastating long-term effects. He fundamentally reshaped how immigration administration works.
For example?
Well, he helped slash annual refugee admissions by about 3/4 compared to 2016 levels.
A huge cut.
Massive. And he guided the public charge rule in 2019 that made it significantly harder for lower-income immigrants. You know, the very definition of those huddled masses his own family represented to gain admission or permanent residency.
So using the legal structure itself as the weapon?
It was a highly successful method, yes. Using the existing legal and bureaucratic structures to achieve these deeply held ideological goals.
And that legalistic rigidity, that sort of cold precision, that's still his hallmark today, isn't it? Especially in his current top policy roles since 2025.
Absolutely. Which brings us right into the current cultural war and his deep quest for order.
How does that manifest now?
His current influence, his communication style, it all perfectly reflects that inner worldview we discussed. That mix of intellectual rigor combined with moral rigidity.
And the goal is still fundamental change.
The overarching policy goal seems to be nothing less than fundamentally revising America's self-conception, its identity.
How so?
We saw a stark example when, under his influence, the official mission statement of the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services Agency, well, they removed the historic phrase calling America a nation of immigrants.
Wow. Just deleted it.
Deleted it. He's not just fighting current policy, he's fighting the entire cultural narrative of the nation itself.
And he even went after the Statue of Liberty, didn't he? The ultimate symbol.
He did. He publicly dismissed the Emma Lazarus poem, you know, the one about the huddled masses yearning to breathe free, arguing it shouldn't be seen as defining the statue's purpose, shouldn't be seen as welcoming immigrants, because it was added later, and in his view, carries little meaning.
That's trying to rewrite history, or at least its meaning.
It's an attempt to impose ideological purity onto national memory itself. If the memory, the symbol, doesn't fit his narrow definition of American identity, the impulse is to edit it out or reinterpret it into insignificance.
So now, holding these top policy roles, Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy, Homeland Security Advisor, how is this quest for order being, operationalized for the future? What's planned?
Well, the policy plans being discussed are certainly aggressive,
Yeah.
and they reflect his absolute rejection of any compromise. He advised heavily on the 2024 campaign, as you know.
Right.
And now the focus is on things like mass deportations, specifically looking to use existing, sometimes obscure legal frameworks like the Alien Enemies Act from 1798.
Oh, really reaching back?
Yes, potentially to bypass standard immigration court proceedings, avoid time-consuming hearings, and also plans for building large-scale detention facilities.
And the rationale is?
From his perspective, these are necessary actions, necessary steps to impose clarity, to impose order onto what he perceives as a chaotic environment threatening national identity and security.
Okay, so let's step back. We've looked at the background, the psychology, the tactics, the policies. If you look at the man in totality, what does this deep dive tell us about political power and psychological certainty?
I think it tells us that his policy actions, the push for strong borders, the relentless focus on enforcement, the limiting of outsiders are fundamentally ways to reduce uncertainty.
Uncertainty, fam.
Uncertainty generated by globalization, by demographic change, by cultural shifts that make many people anxious. For someone like Miller, who seems to have found his own identity through absolute contrarianism and an ideological certainty.
Right, back in that perceived chaotic liberal world of his youth.
Exactly. For him, imposing this kind of absolute legalistic order isn't just policy. It feels like a psychological imperative. He's channeling this broad cultural anxiety into concrete policy.
And any compromise is seen as weakness.
It seems so. Any compromise, like the DACA deals he consistently worked to block, appears to be viewed not just as bad policy, but as a failure of will, a surrender to chaos.
So this deep dive has really illuminated the profound impact that one intensely ideological figure, driven by this deep need for order and certainty, can actually have on a nation's structure, its policies, even its soul.
He mastered the architecture of policy, the mechanics of influence, to achieve truly monumental change, often irrespective of the controversy or criticism.
Yeah.
And maybe here's the final provocative thought for you, for our listeners to consider. Miller's success. His ability to channel that cultural anxiety into these meticulously crafted policies, using legalistic rigidity as a political weapon.
What does it reveal?
It reveals perhaps a critical vulnerability in the political system. It shows what can happen when fear of loss, fear of change, and this intense craving for absolute order come to define the policy apparatus.
Regardless of who the president is, the figurehead.
Exactly, regardless of the figurehead. Understanding this level of psychological commitment, this drive, in key figures, especially unelected ones, is just absolutely essential if you want to interpret the national political trajectory going forward. You have to understand the people pulling the levers.
A really essential lesson for navigating, well, the political landscape today. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the architecture of modern power.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time.